Good afternoon, everyone. Nogis Lex, in association with the Vidit Legal Project, brings you this unique panel discussion by students intrigued by public policy and interested in analyzing its impact. Today, we will be discussing the impact of the National Education Policy 2020, which was approved by the Union Cabinet on the 29th of July 2020. On the panel today with us, we have Anushka Nair of Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Patiala, Neha Patil from University of Mumbai Law Academy, and Niharika Sinha from Army Law College, Pune. And I am Ishani Agarwal from Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Education today is synonymous with skill sets and access to information. More than that, it's a means of employment. Education and its system is a topic close to home for us as students, and the NEP, by bringing large-scale transformational changes almost after 34 years, really interests us. It is a complete overhaul of the existing system with structural changes in the division of stages corresponding to a child's age. It does away with rote learning and proposes, instead of annual examinations, board examinations at the completion of each stage, which will be in a modular format. The policy brings particularly interesting changes by the introduction of bagless days, the three-language formula, and an emphasis on vocational training right from grade 5. One of the most striking changes, though, has been the change in the medium of instruction till grade 5 to mother language, home language, local language, and regional language. With a multidisciplinary approach, the government introduces flexibility in higher education with common entrance exams and multiple entry and exit options. Talks of increasing the number of enrolled students and assuring the right of education right from the age of 3 to the age of 18 also make this policy particularly interesting. Fee cap and greater autonomy to private institutions are proposed to improve the quality and the quantity of the educated youth. The policy holds many intriguing provisions, and it's seemingly revolutionary. But with that, it also brings a few questions to mind on its implementation. With that in mind, let's engage with our panelists on some of the critical points of this policy.
So, as Ishani, you pointed out, I think the most welcoming change is the one where the shift has been made from 10 plus 2 curriculum to 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 system. I think it's very well planned, and it much more specifies and takes a very scientific approach towards a development of a person from his cognitive uh, development. And I think the first 5 years are much more creative, and much more attention has been given to early age education and care. The next three are about creative learning, classroom interaction. After that, the three are about experimental learning process, and the last four are multidisciplinary structure and very flexible. The education system or the curriculum has made very flexible according to the creativity or the need or interest of a child. So I think that's a very impressive uh, chance taken by the government. I really like how the much more focused has been paid in early education system, and this could be done through this could come through pre-primary schools and anganwadis. But I think there is a bit of a gap, as we have seen that mostly students from or children from upper classes or middle classes go for primary private schools, and this is something which has always deprived, or such kind of opportunity is never given to children of poor classes. So I think the policy would much more as it focusing on early education, which will focus on the development of anganwadis and structuring infrastructure, along with pay much more attention towards the qualification of workers working in those institutes. And one more point about the policy is that the gross enrollment ratio, which is going to increase, or which has planned to increase to 50% by 2035. I think this could be done by distance or open learning, as we can see that due to lockdown, we all have our colleges or lectures online. So maybe this could become a very crucial part of our education system. The virtual learning can become a very important, play a very important role in future.
Right.
So,
Definitely the government is trying to work on this aspect of including maximum number of children as possible in this under this policy. But do you think the provisions, while they talk about increasing the number of enrolled students, are they planned out in such a manner that they will affect all the sections of the society similarly? Like, is the policy inclusive like that? So.
So, like the gross enrollment ratio has increased substantially, and as it should, truly, access to education should not be denied to any child on the basis of their birth or their background, right? So, due to Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan or the Right to Education Act, the gross enrollment ratio has increased substantially in elementary education. But we see that this number drops when we come up to higher education, and it's extremely disproportionate when it comes to socio-economically disadvantaged groups. Now, a unique feature that this particular policy has included is it has recognized what a socio-economically disadvantaged group is. Not only has it talked about caste or class, but also included children that might be affected by trafficking. And another aspect that the policy has focused on is women. It has set up a gender inclusion fund in order to facilitate education for women and transgenders. However, I personally feel that there could have been more the policy could have done for transgender people in terms of ensuring equality and accessibility by setting up separate washrooms or making specific provisions to help their predicament when it comes to abuse or discrimination during their education. Another amazing provision that the government has come up with in this policy is to accommodate geographical identities of people. They've come up with innovative policies like giving cycles, or giving like a breakfast, like we have the midday meal scheme, giving out breakfast. So that sort of a thing has been made in order to incentivize education for women. They have enabled that schools are closer to home, right? So that actually boosts education for access to education for women. But one area where inclusivity, or one sect that I feel that has been left out, have been disabled children, because the policy talks about home-based education for them. So that I feel is a way of excluding them. And till now, the education or special schools run for disabled children come under the Ministry of Social Justice and Welfare. But this should come under the Ministry of Education. It should have been something that the National Education Policy would have done, or should have done, in this particular amendment, or they have to look up to that. So I feel there have been various areas where the policy could have been inclusive but has not been.
So, engaging a little further with the geographical backgrounds that you spoke of, I believe that the language formula and the change in the medium of instruction that the policy entails will be particularly interesting to be looked at from the light of India being such a diverse country, geographically, culturally, regionally, so diverse. And so what do you think could be the impacts of changing focus of the medium of instruction in such a manner? Could we engage with that?
Well, Ishani, when we talk about inclusivity and then we bring up the topic of language, these two are, when you look at the policy where it states that you have to take 3 languages and out of which 2 have to be regional, it, is counterproductive to the aim of inclusivity. The policy states that the kid will have flexibility to choose, the 2 regional languages that they get to pick. But education is going to be very tough on the child. Also, it also does not take into account the people that move around the country. Military kids move around the country constantly on postings every 2-3 years, and other jobs, government jobs as such. So it does not take into account those children, and it says that the school should provide those languages that the kid wishes to take, which puts unnecessary pressure on the schools across the nation to provide those related infrastructural changes and hiring faculty to teach those subjects. already there is a deficit of the number of teachers available to teach regular academics. Now we are putting in more languages into the fold, and we're also introducing vocational teachers is the problem.
Right. So what we see here is that a problem on the practicality aspect of things. So like introduction of vocational training will lead to introduction of essentially so many new subjects all across the nation. Right.
Yeah, so I think just like Niharika spoke, that vocational training has, I guess, positive and negative both impacts. Positive are that the students can get experience education from early stages, but then the negative are that what if students get much more attracted or much more fascinated by such kind of vocational courses and do not focus on technical or deep studies about something, about a specific subject. This could be very problematic when they go for higher education. So yeah, I think vocational trainings must be taken with very care, must be executed with very care, and the student should not lose interest in a specific or very technical subjects as such. And then along with that, there is one more thing I would like to add, that I really liked, well, just like we used to criticize this very rigid structure of science, humanity, or commerce fields in our curriculum. Now it has become very flexible. The students can pick uh, subjects or subjects of their interest or subjects which they like or would like to pursue. They could be very innovative with the combination of creativity they can show, or combination of subjects they can show, or research they can do in it. Means just imagine in a university or a lab there is a person with, somewhere combination of music, literature, or physics, maths. These subjects were mismatched, and the person is very creative about such things. So yeah, I think nowadays our country is promoting a very innovative and creative based educational system and promoting such knowledge. Along with, we have seen so many reforms come along, and they also I'm so sorry, so they also helped us in being very creative about everything. uh, coming back to Coming back to some stats, that us government agency sorry so US government agency has come up with a stat that India is the third largest country in publishing scientific or research, scientific papers or research papers. Well, when people in India are so knowledgeable, so research oriented, then what will happen if this research is used in implementation and improvement of our own country? This will help in developing our nation to become a developed nation. So yeah, there is much more need for implementation, execution of this reform, funding of this reform. There is need that the government policies prioritize their needs according to it. I mean, this plays a much more important role in the future of a country. Well, along the policy, the one more point in policy is that the setting up of National Research Foundation, which is acting like a catalyst, or like a catalyst to fund or to recognize such research oriented organizations to improve their quality and to motivate students to take up subjects and take up learning things and put them in a practical scenario. So yeah, I think
Neha,
yeah,
I think you were engaging with the in line with the Prime Minister's thought that we witnessed on the Independence Day speech,
yeah.
that research is going to be the foundation of the development of our nation. And so, talking of all of this emphasis on on research, so what we need to ensure is a better inclusivity of children in the higher education area. And what we see is a lot of dropouts due to various reasons. So, panel, I'd like to ask you that do you think this policy reforms that, brings any changes that could help combat that issue of by, making education easier for students in any way?
Yeah, another innovative thing that the policy comes up with is multiple entry and exit points, right? So not only does that enable inclusivity, wherein if you could not afford education at a certain point of time and then you join again, that definitely promotes inclusivity, but it also enables you to become a polymath or become somebody who is specialized in not just one subject but multiple subjects. So you could have pursued like your bachelor's in math and do like 1 year or 2 years in math, and then you can take an exit with a diploma in that subject and then study physics, which makes you a sort of person who has multidisciplinary knowledge, right? So that enables your research. Another aspect that we should discuss is the discontinuation of MPhil as a program. So that also is a step in order to make it easier for you to achieve your PhD and in order for you to become a better research scholar. So we are essentially removing the roadblock in order to become a research scholar by discontinuing MPhil. So all of these provisions, and there have been provisions in order to promote artificial intelligence as well when it comes down to research. So we've talked about how coding is going to be introduced in schools, right? And so then that promotes technological change, and that promotes a sort of culture for research and technology in students from the very beginning itself.
Right. So,
Just to present an alternative point of view to Anushka's point, is that what is the validity of the certificate that will be given, the diploma that is given? It is, we are aiming for universally applicable education. So what is the value of that certificate outside of our nation? For students hoping to go abroad for, let's say, their masters or their PhDs, are those degrees gonna be valid? Are they gonna affect their chances of getting admitted into those universities? Are they gonna affect their chances of getting jobs outside our country? So this also needs to be looked upon before implementing this policy. And just like this, there are a lot of policies that, there are a lot of clauses in the policy which need to, which people have to take a second look at, the government has to take a second look at before we can implement it. Such as the policy does talk about gender inclusions, but there is no provision for SCs and STs. They also talk about gross enrollment ratio, but there are no infrastructural changes to support it. Then the influx of that many number of students is going to require increase in the number of schools, increase in the number of universities, which we right now do not have. So in order to make that happen, the government needs to invest in way more money than it's currently investing to make that a reality. One more thing that I'd like to point out would be that teacher training programs. So the policy states that there will be teacher training programs, and that there are going to be certain qualifications which are required for teachers to be approved. Now that is going to leave half of our current teacher population out in the cold. They are underpaid and overworked, and they do not have they also take on, apart from the jobs of teaching, they take on administrative roles in the school. So that is also going to be that is also an important point to look at before we just blindly go about implementing this policy.
Right. So you spoke of a number of issues that will be faced by the policymakers in the implementation due to the lack of infrastructure. So also you touched upon funding. So one interesting thing that I encountered was that ever since the 1960s, under the Kothari Commission, the government has had a vision of just increasing their spending on the education sector under the budget. But in the recent years, we haven't really witnessed that. And also in the policy, there are long-term implications of that in the long term would lead to privatization of education. So isn't that a little rhetorical in nature? I mean,
Yeah, so I agree with you. Yes, it is rhetoric in nature, and there needs a proper roadmap for the financial division of money or percentage or where it should be. There is need for a proper roadmap or a proper structure of fundings. So, as you said, that the 1966 Kothari Commission did bring up this, that there was this need of investing 6% of GDP in the education policy or education system. And even after that, in 2014, BJP's election manifestation had this one point where they said that there is this, they are going to increase the percentage of investment, the GDP percentage, 6 percentage of GDP in the education policy or education system. But it has been 6 years and we still are lacking behind to that target. We are still on 4.2 percentage, and we do have policies in the past. We do have seen this, but it is important this time that what the implementation part plays a very important role in the coming up future, because I think the whole policy depends on this financial strategy of the government, and we do are looking forward that how the government is planning to come up with a proper structure, proper investment strategies, and how we achieve to the 6% of GDP in the investment.
Right. So also coming up with the digitalization aspect that the policy touches upon. So do you think that this emphasis on digitalization could lead to segregation among students and like create a digital divide maybe?
Yeah, I think that digitalizing education has become extremely important, as we've witnessed in the current times in a pandemic, that in-person communication or in-person education has become impossible. So that does not mean that we can forego quality education. For that, we have to establish already digital repositories for coursework, or we have to establish e-learning platforms. So the government, through this national education policy, has come up with e-learning platforms like Swayam and Diksha, which are basically to give access to all. But now we know in this country that not every citizen has access to internet, or not every individual has access to a laptop. So that creates a digital divide. Now, how the policy tries to counter it is by giving an alternative of using radios or a television. So that seems like a plausible argument, or that seems like a plausible strategy, because you can have educational programs on that, like we have for farmers. We should have similar educational and socially educating programs in order to help children who do not have access to the internet. So digital education can create a digital divide, but it is something that has just to be tackled with, because it's a form of open learning. So you should not be discouraging of digital education, but rather make it more inclusive. That's my point of view.
Right. So it's really positive, and I guess it's really encouraging to see that the government is, in a way, establishing and encountering this new normal that we all seem to reference in this day and age of COVID. Right. So, but coming to the part of segregation from another aspect, which has been a very popular criticism of the policy, is that that the policy is ambiguous or vacuous when it comes to using implementing the age-old idea of changing the medium of instruction to mother language. But do you think this will create like a divide in society, or because the policy fails to like engage with it in a very articulate manner? Is that so?
Well, there are obvious shortcomings of the language policy because it doesn't eradicate completely, but it does sideline the role of the English language in our education. If all our languages are taught in if all our subjects are taught in the regional language, then our understanding of the English language becomes limited. And then when the child transitions from the 5th to the 6th grade, or from the 7th to the 8th grade, when the education medium shifts to English, it becomes very hard for the child to cope. and it would negatively impact the future workforce of our country. We are worried about our employability as a whole in the nation itself, and when we kind of reduce the role of English, kind of sideline it, then it just worsens the situation. And it also sort of Indianizes the education, when what we are looking for in this day and age is a globally accepted, universally applicable education.
Right. So concerns of employability and division that were raised do seem to you seem to agree with them, that the critics have raised. Right.
Yes.
So another factor that has been, another question on employability that was raised earlier also was in relation to the interdisciplinary approach that the government wants to operate on a higher education platform. So, but do you think that it's a welcome change, as it can help combat the present insularity that exists in the education system?
Well, I'll take this question. So I think, yeah, it is a welcoming change because we have been in that rigid structure for way too long. And we did have complaint when it was our time of picking a career in it. Uh, so I think this will promote more creative thinking, more uh, help student, motivate them to pursue something they would be really interested in. This will also take, I think it should be mentioned in some mentioned by some person or by the government, but career counseling can play a very major role in this part, where the scholars or the professionals could guide students in picking up something they are interested in and not going by the societal path of picking up something your parents asked you to, or picking up something your friends told you to. You know, maybe it would get more creative, maybe it would get more developing or and innovative.
Right. So hopes of doing away with the herd mentality as we address it. I believe that this policy gives looking at it in a positive note, it gives a chance for a student to turn their passion or their interests into a career, and that's interesting. And it'll be interesting to see that unfold. I mean, we have witnessed that in various, I would say, countries around the world, but it will be particularly interesting to notice that here in India. Um, so, so coming to the whole, increasing the choices and increasing the number of subjects or the choices that are available to students, we should look at vocational training also in that light, I believe. So, do you think that introduction of vocational training and like various other provisions as such, like the interdisciplinary approach, what impact will they have on the current issue of employability of educated youth that we face in the country? Like, can we place major hopes on this policy to tackle that issue?
Well, the vocational training policy is definitely something which has been, applauded by many. But I think there are pros and cons to every situation, including this one. So the vocational program that will be offered is going to be different on a rural level and an urban level. The local teacher education program proposed by the policy already segregates the students into certain socio-economic categories from an early stage, and these stages and these groups are sort of reinforced when the learning skills are based on the areas that the kids live in. So some academicians are worried that this might create more laborers instead of educated youth. So because a lot of people in the rural area might drop out after learning those technical skills. Then it also not just the vocational training policy, but a lot of our policies, a lot of the clauses in the policy affect employability. And a multidisciplinary approach is of course great for a child to learn many skills, but in this day and age where jobs require highly specialized skills, just a holistic education might be counterproductive and make those jobs inaccessible to the youth. So, we as law students, and then again, there is the problem of exploitation by, large corporations and governments. We as law students have come across or have been one of those people who, to gain experience in the professional world, go work for corporations and they extract a lot of work from us, with no financial, compensation. And with no financial compensation, and sometimes even we get extracted they extract money out of the student itself for that internship position. In a country where entry level jobs require MBAs and PhDs, and students are rejected for internships, due to lack of experience. So I think vocational training is a policy, and the multidisciplinary approach is a policy that needs to be, reviewed once again. And these clauses need to be added. Constructive criticism needs to be implemented in the policy before we can look at it again, before we can implement it.
Right. So, what you fear is that we might have a workforce that will be like a jack of all trades, master of none, right? Yeah. That's understandable. I mean, that's especially due to, I would say, the competition in the present society. Specialization in jobs has gained a lot of importance. So this could create that issue, and I mean, this clearly interplays with the language issue as well. When we talk about employability, or we talk about just ensuring that like we want to tackle this problem of unemployment in our country, so we need to be a little practical and then think of creative freedom. That's fair point taken. Fair point. Right. So, but what about the people who were previously denied the right to education for whatever reason? I mean, we see there are a lot of, like, the multi-entry and exit option that we spoke of could potentially result in perpetuating this issue of people dropping out before they are able to achieve even like a high school level of qualification. So what does this policy do for them? Like, is it going 2 steps further to include them, or is the status quo maintained?
So it's actually interesting to note that the policy has an entire section on adult education, and which has been something that has not been a focus in earlier on education policies. It in itself focuses on forming an adult curriculum framework, because obviously the learning techniques and the infrastructure has to be different if we are to accommodate adults in our education system. And now, why does it become important to for us as a society to accommodate adults? Because it not only leads to a better social environment and access to education for more children, because an educated adult would believe that his child should also be educated, but it also leads to a certain sort of political will. If we have an educated workforce, and if we have an educated adult population, it leads to a better social and political environment in the country. So now, in order to do that, they have talked about setting up adult education centers, right, wherein there'd be special provisions in order to educate adults. Now, these education centers would also have vocational training as a sub theme and as a sub part of the curriculum. Now, another very interesting thing that I feel that they have accommodated in adult education, and as well as made a change in the content for elementary and high school education, is the inclusion of critical thinking. Now, they've tried to accommodate critical life skills and critical thinking in the policy as a part of the curriculum itself, which I feel is a big step away from rote learning or rote memory. It is essentially a very important step. As a student who has herself been a victim of a system wherein I was made to mug up stuff, I feel that this is a thing that I feel is going to enable many of us to become better citizens of the country. And it's a big positive from the policy.
Right. So another, I would say, criticism that has been fairly accepted, fairly brought up by the three chiefs have been as to that the policy is too aspirational without really setting out any, ground targets or goals, which raises so many questions as to speculations of implementation. So, do you think that's a fair criticism? I mean, do you agree?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the policy needs a lot of work in terms of implementation, as if from the government, but also, the public sector. So a lot of money is going to go into the implementation of this policy. Now the policy says that it's going to allocate about 6% of the GDP into implements. It can't promise to allocate so much money for the next 20 years into education. With the current pandemic raging on, with the economy crash, and so many other problems more to come in the future, the the government's attention financially is going to be diverted many a times, and that's why it's really far-fetched. I think if it's set short-term goals, achievable short-term goals, then it might inspire more hope from the public, and it's people who are criticizing it as well.
Right. So I think the government does need to. I fairly agree to that point that there need to be a certain step, short-term goals that need to be put in place. I mean, key targets in terms of numbers that could be achieved. What we see here, numbers are placed. Like the government is trying to have a 100% gross enrollment ratio by the year 2030 for primary and secondary education, and 50% vocational learners of the country by the year 2025. But I mean, if we could see a little impact of that in a year or two, maybe we could work on a better cost, or like we could work on a better analysis on that way.
Another problem with setting targets that I feel has been there is the ambiguity of it all. Like I talked about inclusivity, and so inclusivity also has so many ambiguous provisions. For example, you talk about including education from like education becoming a necessary right from the age of 3 till 18. Previously, the Right to Education Act talks about 6 to 18. So that's an amendment that you have to make. That is yet to be made, right? But the policy, so all of these are gray areas wherein they're trying to make a provision. However, it's not fully established. Another gray area I feel is the extreme centralization of the policy. Now, if you look at this policy, they're essentially trying to integrate the whole education system of the country and make it one big whole system governed by the national body. Whereas, this is a subject of the union of the it's largely governed till now by the state list. So it seems like it's a subject of the union list, whereas it's a concurrent list subject. So we have to understand the stake that state governments have in this particular policy, which is something that this policy does not take into account. You have to understand the role the local schools are going to play. It seems to be pretty ambitious when it talks about making school complexes and integrating everything and breaking affiliations of local colleges to universities in order to promote the quality of education. But then again, what happens to the students in those colleges, that do not get a university certified degree, right? So there are these gray areas, and also privatization is a very big gray area, wherein they talk about how schools being set up should be not for profit, but most of these schools are set up by businessmen or politicians, or we a lot of law schools are private law schools, right? So you cannot expect them to forego their profit. And if the policy does aim to do that, it does not set out any such framework through which it tries to achieve these goals. So there's a lot in the policy that is left unexplained, and a lot of legal loopholes that have to be looked into before I can say that I'm hopeful about the implementation of the policy. So yeah, these have to be worked upon.
So also there was on the topic of a gray area, and I believe it hasn't been discussed as much, is the long-term doing away with of affiliations with universities. And I believe that's a critical aspect of as to ensuring a common accreditation to the students and ensuring a quality of education that's being provided. So, do you think that's a welcome move, though, that the private institutions or even that institutions would be given autonomy? Do you think that's a welcome change?
Well, I think the policy has been drafted very beautifully, and it is ambitious and a historical policy. Uh, it has taken a very big leap from making a policy after 30 plus years, amending a policy or coming up with something new and creative according to the demand of digitalization and according to considering the present scenario. It has managed to come up and compete, or maybe to try to be much more make it much more creative, or come up with the standards of international education and globalization level. I think just like Niharika spoke, the long-term goals have been set, but there is this need of implementing short-term goals and to take in charge that how the policy, the visionary policy has already been made, but how it's going to be get implemented or executed in our country.
Right. So, we did briefly touch upon this, but I believe that it might feel this is a little out of conversation, but I feel it needs to be addressed as to reservations and how there's no mention of that on the new policy. There was that it does not cater to the I would say there's no commitment towards affirmative action. So, do you think it's like high time, because we've had reservation for so long, that is it a step towards doing away with reservation altogether? And like, is that a welcome change as per the panel?
I don't think that this is a step in a way of doing away with reservation, because the policy shows an intention to accommodate socio-economically disadvantaged groups, and then again it also talks about disabled children, but they do not make any concrete promises, which is something that it's not to do away with reservation, but it seems merely like a way to not they've actually not thought about it, in the sense that wherein we just mention socioeconomic disadvantaged communities, and we come up with they've essentially tried to come up with more innovative ways in order to accommodate these historically underrepresented groups by because they have various ailments. It's not just historical underrepresentation, but also poverty, but also a lack of access to resources. So I feel that the education policy has tried to overcome this sort of gap by providing them other aids, rather than going for a very directly affirmative action wherein they keep a seat specifically for them. They've tried to make it easier to come to school, or they've tried to make it easier for them to stay in school by making school complexes, or they've tried to make the curriculum more like accessible and understandable and useful for these communities. So I would say that a step has been taken, but it is yet to be a fruit, or it is yet to be concrete.
Right. So, looking at these sections of the society from like a non-elitist perspective. So, in that light, I believe even the language rule, for that matter, can be looked at in a positive light. I mean, it just ensures that the vocational training and the language rule together could turn out to be a very positive interplay for such sections of the society. If we can ensure that kids do get access to school and they get a certain level of training, then the chances of employability and coming out of breaking caste barriers are far more than what we witness in today's day and age. So I mean that could be one of the positives, a positive aspirations from the policy. But like we briefly touched upon how the policy is a little ambiguous when it comes to a certain term. So like there is a mention of public spirited philanthropic higher education institute. So I mean, that's just saying that it's privatized, but it's public spirited. So again, don't you think like the policy fails to provide clarifications and like leaves a lot of things open to interpretation? So like, could we engage with a few gray areas that you feel that are there in the policy?
Yeah, that's something that I agree on. When you come down to privatization, like I talk to you about how the government says that it should be not for profit, but then again, why should it be not for profit? And if it is to be not for profit, what are you going to do to ensure that this sort of monopoly is not created? Currently, we notice that a sort of monopoly is created when it comes down to education. Even people who might not be able to afford private education go in for that sort of stream and pay heavily through it. I mean, I don't know. There are movies about it called Hindi medium and all of that. Why is that a phenomenon? Because we feel that the quality of government education has gone down. Right, so that is something that the government has to address. It has in this policy, it does not seem to come to terms with that fact that this is something that the private sector is monopolizing, and that should not be the case.
Right.
Just adding on to Anushka's point, I would also like to, bring the attention of the panelists to the fact that the policy wishes to introduce, the entry of foreign universities into our education system. We've already talked about how, as Anushka mentioned, how higher education, once privatized, is going to become more expensive. Once these foreign universities step in, then it's going to further increase the cost of education, higher education in the country, and make it unaccessible to the poorer stratas of the society, which goes against the whole spirit of the NEP's inclusivity policy. And it also, kind of undermines the other universities in the country, which, are already struggling with their dismal rankings in international surveys of universities. So I think that also needs to be looked upon.
Yes, I believe,
Right.
just like Niharika, you said that there is this need for concentrating on the university as improving the quality of education of our national universities or IITs, or we have this NLUs. So much more focusing on that area maybe would improve the level of education and the understanding of faculty about this concept. So I think I'll just touch upon a point that the change in educational policy is also going to affect the faculty, the professors, or the teaching staff of the system, and especially it's sorry. So, especially how the faculty could accept this new approaches and implement and increase the productivity of any kind of education system. Like just I spoke about being creative or being innovative. So yeah, this be a student's being innovative, a student being creative is okay. But how the faculty, how the department or the university is going to apply these things practically and make it much more professional.
Right. Another interesting point, I believe, that right now we're talking about the synchronization within universities or, among universities to maintain a standard of education. But what this policy entails, but it, does not touch upon is how there will also be interministerial cooperation that will be required. So, like to make the vocational programs a success, that essentially means that the education ministry and skill development ministry and the labor ministry work in unison and in coordination. But the policy fails to provide like a plan of synchronization of such of such ground rules. Are there any such nuanced negatives that you feel the policy has?
Well, Ishani, the problem I think is that, coupled with the fact that it has also proposed multiple entry and exit points. So, a student taking a 2 or 3 year break in their education is not going to be in touch with the education they did all those years ago. So, there is definitely going to be a disconnect in the education in their degrees, and that is definitely a negative aspect of the policy.
Right. So, hoping to end this discussion on a positive note, let's not be so skeptical and engage with a few positives as to which you might have feel have not been addressed as of now. So, like one such point I feel is that there is a collaborative strategy that has been put forward by the policy. I mean, the interplay between the language formula, the vocational training, and I mean, not to criticize it from a very elitist point of view. Like for somebody to just break out of the shackle that a welder's son has to become a welder, just the access to vocational training to maybe try to explore something else. Like in CBSE curriculum, we had this story that there's a son of a bangle maker who dreams to become a mechanic. So if just being able to provide a section of society with those opportunities also, and I mean it has to be appreciated on the government's part that they are thinking in such terms. I believe that also needs to be looked at in a positive light. So any other positive that might come to the panel's mind?
Well, I think the vocational part which Niharika touched is that societies which are financially poor or students which have health issues, family issues, can take up this vocational courses and could utilize utilize these resources in helping their families. So they are not tagged as being a backward or financially unstable class, or maybe the student do not have to discontinue his college or be a dropout. He could just take a vocational course, help his family for a while, and then get back and finish his graduation. So yeah.
Yeah, another thing that the policy does in order to enable an access to education for all is to have directed scholarships, wherein you direct like when it recognizes socio-economically disadvantaged groups, it also makes provisions to undo that. If there is a group that is disadvantaged, it makes scholarships that are directed for that group specifically, and in order to address their issues. It talks about how, so another thing that we have seen in the recent past is our government has started recognizing aspirational districts. Right now, in these aspirational districts, there have been socio-economically disadvantaged groups in high numbers, in large numbers. So now we have to address that from a geographical point of view as well. Now, you cannot just take that from a historical point of view, but currently, if there is a particular state, like let's say Jharkhand or Uttar Pradesh, that is lacking in education, then we have to make provisions wherein in national universities, at national level, we try to accommodate these states. It's a rather good move in this particular policy to recognize not just economical backdrops but geographical disadvantages as well, because it becomes important when you look at it from an integration perspective. Why is a national law university seen as a more inclusive place? Because it gives the promise of having people from different sections of society, from different states, right? So that is something that the government has tried to accommodate through this policy in not just certain specific institutions, but all over the country, which I feel is a welcome change.
Right. So the universalization of education is definitely a positive move, which is also reflected in increasing the compulsory education provision age. I believe that should really, again, provided effective implementation that can be ensured by amending the Right to Education Act, but because that will increase the accountability that the universities have towards that commitment. Right. So I believe we were fairly successful in engaging with the facts, the positives and the negatives of the policy. The government has rolled out a policy which is revolutionary in nature, and I mean they have done a commendable job in touching upon various aspects of things. But also there are a lot of gray areas that there is just a mention of buzzwords without much implementation, that's like a concrete implementation plan. So let's see, the policy on paper looks good. Let's wait for it to turn into fact. And I believe with that, we end with our panel discussion here. We would like to thank Not Just Lex for providing us with this opportunity to engage with this topic in depth. And we would like to extend a special thanks towards Abhishek Sinha sir, founder Not Just Lex, for helping us all throughout this enriching journey. A big thank you to all the participants for being a patient audience, and thank you for your patient listening. We hope we were successful in making this session informative and thought-provoking, and you go back with something that alters your idea and your, I would say, mindset towards public policy. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.